sudden hush falls. I can see myself over there, but I mustn't look at it. But I think it means that we start. Welcome. It's 6:30, it's Tuesday, so that means that it's our weekly open news meeting. I'm Giles Whittell, which is a bit different from usual. Your usual silver-tongued hosts have vacated the octagon, and so it's my turn. And I've got this. This is my first time with an iPad. It's branded. So forgive me as I raise my glasses to read what's on it, and then lower them to see who's out there. We have an hour. I think it'll fly by because we've got a lot to talk about. I mean, the point of this, as you'll know, if you've been to these before, is to figure out what we think matters, what we think about what we think matters. Not collectively, that often comes out wrong. We welcome dissent. And really importantly, how to cover it. We're in the middle of the Tory party conference. Johnson speaks tomorrow. But we're also in the middle of a massive domestic story, which is of particularly consuming interest, I know, to a lot of our members and a lot of our fellow Tortoise employees here, namely what to do about reforming policing so that people who rape and murder are convicted and punished, especially if they are also in positions of power and trust, namely police officers. 26 of Wayne Couzens' fellow officers have committed sex crimes since 2016. Some have been hired since committing sex crimes. There's no rule against that, unbelievably. So we want to talk about that. We want to talk a bit about Facebook, which went offline, but also, even if it hadn't gone offline, had enough problems this time yesterday. And I hope within the hour to come back to the Tories in Manchester. We have an emissary from Manchester up there last night. Might even quiz him about that. Our founder, James. But first, we were talking about Wayne Couzens and policing and sex crimes yesterday on Twitter Spaces. And one theme, we were asking the question, I'm going to ask it again now. How should we continue to cover this? I mean, our colleague, Liz Mosley, has made the point very forcefully that this is one of the things that we just have to keep hammering on at. But we have to do it in a smart way. And a number of colleagues said, we have to just keep telling stories to show why it matters and to do it in the most compelling way possible. So that's where we left off yesterday at 1 o'clock. And Patricia, you were one of the people. By the way, before I put the crosshairs on Patricia, who hasn't even got a mic, please, everybody pitch in, right? I'm going to try and follow this. Ian Campbell said, look, no, we are going to talk about Facebook, Ian. Whatever you think of it. I'm just getting used to the chat here. But let's start where it's serious. What you were saying, Patricia, yesterday was we need to keep telling these stories. But I know that partly through your reporting on our Hidden Homicide series, you found that there are a lot of obstacles in the way of doing simple reporting. So, I mean, it's a bit of an open-ended question, but what's your solution? Where do you think we need to go?
So I said yesterday, I think human-led stories, which we do at Tortoise, that's how we frame our narratives, are crucial to this. But that has to be supplemented by data. I think FOIs are something that is an obvious place to go with this story.
Freedom of information.
Yeah, freedom of information requests. We have, as journalists, a legal right to find out information as long as it doesn't take too long for public bodies to collect it. So reaching out to police forces and finding out the obvious questions. Other publications have already done it, but around how many police officers are currently charged with sexual misconduct, flashing, et cetera, is one place to start. What I was talking to you about earlier was that equally important is the data that is not collecting and missing, and often that is what ends up being the story. I got frustrated today because I received a response 8 months late from my Freedom of Information request around hidden homicides. I can see Louise there on the screen. She's laughing. I put in Freedom of Information request to find out how many women had died suddenly and unexpectedly as a result.
Wait, how many women had
died suddenly and unexpectedly, and who had a background of domestic abuse against their address or against their partner, or they themselves have been victims. Or most places responded and said, sorry, we don't have that data. But what sort of came out of that investigation, I wrote a piece on it, was that every police force collects things differently. And the response I got today from this particular police force was like, we don't record the gender of the person who died. That's only in the report. So you can't just put a search in and be like, okay, how many women died suddenly and unexpectedly in this police force last year? You can't just do that according to their response. You have to go in and look individually, let alone tracking the gender of the perpetrator. In other words, when you're trying to do an analysis, how can you identify that misogyny, that femicide is happening, for example? And we know that this spreads, this is just internal police data. The Office for National Statistics does not split, I'm straying slightly, but it doesn't split homicide statistics by gender, so you don't know how many men have killed women specifically. That the only research done on that is by the Femicide Census and Karen and Gala Smith. My point being, that's a story. What we don't know is equally important. If we're not tracking the problem, how are we going to fix the problem? Even if we know, as Liz said in her piece, even if we know, how are we going to get change if we don't have data on it?
and just how, in practical terms, does that affect your work? You were saying it. The first part of that was it's gender is not listed in the headline, so it's the difference between being able to scan a spreadsheet, and what click through and look at hundreds, thousands of individual case reports.
So in this particular email, I just struggle to believe it, but anyway, that's what they said in their email. I have to go with what they said. They had 200 sudden deaths in that particular year. So at a glance, you can't see how many of those deaths were women,
right,
without going into the report.
And which police force was this?
Devon.
Okay. And the 8-month delay, who establishes the time frame?
So a Freedom of Information request officially is 28 days. That's a legal requirement. I don't know how, but that's the time frame that they say that they have to respond by. In practice, that never happens. I've seen journalists talk about getting a response 3 years later.
Right.
They said because of COVID there were delays. They said because we sent the question around Christmas there were delays. It's been 8 months, so we got an initial response, but then they said that data wasn't available, and when I pushed on that, they took a further 6 months.
And I mean, just coming back to the point of how we report this, are we going back to hidden homicides and following up on that? Or, I mean, you've just been describing the importance of knowing what we don't know, and that is one thing that you've found. But where should we be going next in terms of telling those human stories? I mean, that's a data story.
Yeah.
And hidden homicides, tragically, were stories about people who are dead and people grieving for them. Is there a whole nother category? I was wondering yesterday, thinking aloud, if we need to be talking to survivors of people, I mean, who have been exposed to these sort of entry-level sexual crimes that very large numbers of members of the public, but also the police force, have been exposed to. Is there a way of doing that?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think Basha and Louise might be better placed to answer this, but when we've looked at specific police forces, I know that there are ones that have that are known for having, particularly high rates of misconduct or of having, being particularly bad in this area. And So looking at them, looking at people who have been, yeah, maybe we should get Louise or Bash.
Well, I think Louise is on the call. Louise Tickle, are you on the call? Can we come to you? I can see you there.
Yes.
Can you weigh in here and tell us what I believe that you are already engaged in something else for Tortoise. Are you allowed to tell us about that? But either way, what is your general response to the horribly open-ended question, what do we do next about this?
One of the things that was really fascinating to me as we got to the end of the hidden homicides investigation, which looked a lot at how police ignored the sudden unexpected deaths of women until their relatives, banged and shouted for years and forced them to address it, was how unwilling they were to engage with us. And I know that might sound surprising because as journalists, we're used to authorities of state being unwilling to engage with us. But by contrast, when these authority organizations are allowed to show themselves in a good light, for instance, 24 hours in police custody, for instance, the series that a friend of mine made, Brian Woods at True Vision, called Catching a Killer, where they were embedded with Thames Valley Police, watching them do murder investigations, literally from the point of time when, in one case where there was a horrendous domestic abuse murder. When you can show them in a good light, they're very willing to collaborate. And so I'm trying to think about, as a journalist, you want to get in there, you want to tell the story of what's actually happening. And there's a dilemma, I think, about how far you're willing to go with embedding yourself within an organization. And foreign news journalists have this as well in war zones when they have to embed themselves with the army, and some refuse to do so, in order to find out actually what's going on. And one of the things that we want to do with the hidden homicides investigation to keep it going is to see behind the scenes of an investigation. And we think we're almost there, potentially, with getting access to a police force which has been highly criticised by a family for not having looked at a particular death and having investigated it, but has now decided to look at it again. And I can't really say much more about it than that, because it is really a sensitive time at the moment. But what we'd like to do is go in there and see how they've changed as an organisation, or how they've changed their approach in a particular case. And that might be a way of starting to get a deeper understanding of the things that are going on. Because one of the things I found is that once you're in, people are really surprisingly honest, because no press officer can control every officer all the time. And I remember when I did a piece on the way that Kent police had failed a woman and a 2-year-old child who had been killed by the abusive ex-partner. And I think it was a detective chief inspector who very bravely allowed me access and let me go and let me talk to their officers. And he let me go because they had, as a result of that murder and the fact that they'd known about the really serious risk markers on this woman, they had transformed the way they worked, and he was proud of it, and he wanted to show me. So it's trying to tell the truth of a story while allowing people to explain how they're trying to grow and learn, while also rigorously holding institutions to account for when they fail. And that's a really difficult balancing act, because I want the journalism I do to be constructive and not just to be tearing people down.
Louise, thank you. Yeah, Katie.
It's not a question. I know that's against the rules, but it just strikes me that, to pick up on your data point, when you look at other organizations, they have to measure things and report on things in the same way. I just don't understand enough about the police to understand why it's not the case that all the police forces don't have a set of data criteria that they have to report on and they have to sort of keep centralized. I don't understand how that is the case, and surely that seems like a very obvious thing for us to think through and talk about and make the case for, because it's not okay, one, that they don't collect it in the first place, but it seems amazing to me that a police force doesn't have a set of key indicators that they have to be accountable for reporting on.
I don't know why either.
Does anyone know why?
Louise?
Louise, no. Oh.
Yeah, Louise, we may come back to you on that in a second, but we have a hand raised here. Can we?
I'm a graphic designer, but I'm also interested in service design.
Tell us your name, sorry.
Erin McIntosh. So I was at a talk by a service design agency recently, and they produce a lot of work for various government institutions. And the issue is that the governing bodies rely on these external agencies to design their information services for them. So they actually wait for like an expert to come along and say, you're doing this really poorly, there's a much better way to do this, without kind of taking that initiative themselves.
Right, that's interesting. But the starting point there is a non-centralized system, isn't it?
It's completely non-centralized. Right. The particular example that they spoke of was in education and also within healthcare, but I imagine it's very similar within policing.
Well, let's ask Louise. Louise, why is it that there's no standardized reporting requirement, data collection requirements for police forces in this country?
We thought really hard about this during the investigation. Because, as Patricia explained, we were incredibly frustrated every time we got these different kinds of answers back from our freedom of information requests. And there's a range of answers, and the obvious one is, do institutions care enough? Because we count the things that we care most about. So that's one answer. Another is, and social affairs journalists like me keep banging away on this, but institutions are horrendously underfunded after more than 10 years now of austerity. Who is there to spend concerted brain time thinking hard about what data is important to collect and record? I don't imagine that all 43 police services have somebody who's dedicated to thinking what's important to count. But beyond that, the campaign that we ran from Hidden Homicides was to demand that the government should require that certain kinds of data is counting. And ultimately, if the government doesn't require data to be counted, then where something is optional and where it requires a lot of thinking time, then my supposition would be that it doesn't get counted because there are other more operationally urgent things to do on stretched resources with finite numbers of people. And so things go by the by.
Thanks, Louise. I mean, so the key words there are if the government doesn't require it. Has the government ever has that ever been a live political question? Will it be for Priti Patel now? I mean, when she and people like the Met Commissioner talk about reform, is that one of the items on the agenda? Louise, that's one last one for you.
I've not heard Priti Patel talking in very precise terms about what she wants to happen with regard to policing outcomes. I don't know whether a Home Secretary gets into that level of detail. I don't know whether it's something that you have to engage with as many of the women's rights organisations and anti-violence against women and girls organisations go and lobby civil servants to do. Home Secretaries kind of do sweeping statements about independent reports and then sort of hand it on to a friendly judge. I think that something that Jess Phillips said to me, the MP Jess Phillips, who campaigns on violence against women and girls, said to me, and it was echoed by Patricia earlier, it's what when you ask questions and there is no data, that tells you there is a gaping gap, and that is where the campaigning needs to be.
Right, thank you. Yes, James, in just a second. Well, we'll come to you first, and then Anthony Cope. Okay, Anthony, you're making a point in the chat about the fact that we don't have a national police force. Can you say a little bit more about just how sort of loosely connected the ones that we do have, the 42 that we do have are? Anthony, are you there? Maybe not.
Yes, hi.
Anthony, hi.
Hi. Yeah, well, I mean, as other people have been saying in the chat and on here, different areas have different experiences and different people have different experiences. I've had experiences in North Wales of hate crime, particularly homophobic abuse.
Directed at you, Anthony.
Yeah. And I've been told 3 times that North Wales Police takes hate crime really, really seriously. Guess what? 3 times, nothing happened. I reported it 3 times, and each time, nothing happened. Why is that? Why am I constantly told that one thing is true, and then the reality is a complete opposite? And this is true across a great many different aspects of policing, and this is true across a great many different parts of the country. And for too many people, the outcome and the reality is completely opposite to what we're told.
Right.
And it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. I mean, you know, to my mind, what's happened this week is a culmination of decades of this. You know, misogyny is just the peak. This has been building up for decades, and nobody seems to be listening. Nobody seems to be caring. Yeah, we'll do something. When? In which reality is anything going to be done? Because too many people aren't seeing it.
Anthony, thank you very much. I'll come to you after you. The microphone is closer to you.
Ali Borhani, I'm a Tortoisian, if that's the term, but a couple of things. One is that I don't know, and raising few questions, why do we have to ask for freedom of information? Why the police shouldn't come up with an annual report on all of these cases to the public as a scorecard? Why can we only import energy from Norway and Scandinavian, but not benchmark our police force with them? I'm not saying Singapore or other places. And then when parties just rush on quantity and I hire more, and there is no screening as such about the fabric of police force, aren't we continuing, even if we have the freedom of information, that we get some sour apples? And the other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of these things go back to what I have coined as constitutional constipation, which is we are running on a lot of models that are from, I don't know, 2 or 3 centuries ago. And we have to realize that if there's erosion of trust with police, it's a very, very scary society to live in. So that's just some questions, and thank you.
Do you know, it hadn't even occurred to me that we don't have or expect annual reports from police forces. And trust eroded, of course, would take a long time to rebuild. James? Kerry, I want to go to you. Kerry, are you there?
I'm here now, yeah.
Can you tell us your view on whether the erosion of trust in police is on a steady downward glide slope to oblivion, or whether the plane can gain height again?
Certainly, I mean, for the last, 10 plus years, the Met have taken trust as their most important metric. So in all the surveys that they do, that some years ago, they decided that was the most significant one. They bumped it up to the top of their list. I would imagine, I don't know, I haven't looked at trust data in the police for a while. I would imagine it's on a steady downward glide path because trust in just about everything is on a steady downward glide path. And I don't know what that, I don't know if you're an institution that is facing a decline that starts to feel inevitable, then I don't know what you do or what your response to that is. Whether it's quite easy to imagine that if you think that a decline in trust is baked in, because because trust across a range of institutions has been declining since about 1973, then maybe even if you say it's your single greatest priority, maybe it's hard to sustain that belief in your heart every year, because you think that the 2% fall is about what you're going to get. So why don't you give me a minute to just have a look at what has happened to trust in police, and come back to me, Giles.
Okay. Yeah, go on. You haven't got the mic yet, James.
So a couple of things just practically, and then I wanted to just put something back to Louise if I could. So the reason we don't have a set of national statistics for the police is we don't have a national police force, as Anthony Cope put in the chat. We have a federated police force, and the argument for that historically has been that you're trying in a free country to make sure that you have some balance between the powers of the state and society. And one of the arguments for a federated police force has historically been that you won't have just one monolithic power with a monopoly of violence in the country. And also it's the way historically that our police forces grew up. They grew up with the consent of the public in each of their regions. The really depressing thing about this conversation is that there was an argument, a big political public argument, about how do we create some kind of oversight over the police, which was the creation of independent police and crime commissioners. And never has there been a democratic intervention in this country that has had as low public participation rates, right? No one voted for them, no one cared, right? I think that there's a really big question, though, about whether or not we are, or that IPCC example was a case of an institutional response to a public problem, and we need to think about a public response to a public problem. And by that, I mean that the murder of Stephen Lawrence was not an example of institutional racism in the police. It was the galvanizing evidence of institutional racism in the police that people, throughout the country felt and saw and then were transformed by in that particular case. And clearly in the murder of Sarah Everard, what you're seeing is something that people have seen and known to be true and now galvanized to some kind of response. And the reason I have to say personally, as well as being really upset by it, I also feel really bewildered, is I don't actually know where to look. And this is, if I might, Giles, I just want to throw it back to Louise, because Louise, or Imi actually, I know because you've done a fair bit of thinking about this, we have a 10:30 meeting here where we try and think through how we're going to kind of think about this story, or how might we pursue it in a longer piece. We found ourselves bouncing between what does Mark Kennedy and undercover reporting tell you about the kind of lazy misogyny of the police, the willingness to abuse kind of someone's trust, but in a way that's deeply sexist? Or what does the fact that it appears that women seeking to divorce police officers find it harder and it takes longer than the average time for women seeking to divorce their husbands? Or what should we say about the fact that prosecutions for rape on police officers is statistically considerably lower than prosecutions for rape of across the board? And what does it say if you just looked at a TikTok of Cressida Dick's response to this, about the way in which there's a leadership issue and set of choices? And I suppose why I say I'm bewildered is it's like, it's not one of those scandals that goes somewhere, it goes everywhere. And what's the sensible line to attack, or line to pursue? And this was really a question to you, Louise, because you've covered this in different ways, 10 years or so. You must have had a deep emotional reaction to the Sarah Everard murder, but also then thought, okay, well, what do you choose to do?
It's always a dilemma, and I write about not just domestic abuse, but about children's services. So I'm going to look at the example of when you discover that your own local authority, in my case Gloucestershire's Children's Services Department, is rotten to the core. and you know it for a couple of years before Ofsted comes along and does a really deep dive inspection for 4 weeks and discovers that it's rotten to the core. And you've been reporting on bits and bobs of this for a few years, and then you do the big report on everything that's gone wrong. And then they sort of say publicly, we're working really hard to change. And then you think, this is a service that is underfunded, directors of children's services say, to the tune of £2 billion. How can you do good work when you're underfunded? Do I carry on hitting this council, which we all know is subject to terrible cuts, the police exactly the same? Or do I let them try and rebuild? So there are layers, aren't there? There are layers between where the responsibility is with individual officers, with their senior managers, with the police and crime commissioners, who are political positions and should be holding them to account, and with central government. So as a journalist, it's where do you start to look for the responsibility, and where do you start hitting, and where are those levers that you try and press to try and get change? But, you know, all told, we have a highly misogynistic society and it goes through every layer. And so I understand, James, why you're bewildered, because it is like, where do you start? And I think the important thing is to start with, I mean, my personal, the way I respond to things instantly is with huge indignation, massive rage, sleepless nights, you know, determination to fight. And then working actually with a barrister called Lucy Reed over the last 5 or 6 years has taught me that that is not enough. You have to try and be strategic. You have to look for those levers. You have to think about how you can persuade. And in the journalism you do, you can't only attack. You have to find ways to be constructive.
Which comes back to perhaps to what you were talking about earlier about finding ways to let them show themselves in a good light. It raises other questions about whether you're then shown a Potemkin police force. But
well, you can temper that.
Right. We could easily spend a whole hour on this. Imi, you wanted to weigh in on this. So what did you want to say?
A few things. It's funny, I'm sat here with my sports watch on today and I can see my heart rate and it is high. I just wanted to add one small thing, which came out of a conversation I had, and I have to pick my words carefully, with a young person I know who has entered the Met as a young detective. And I was talking to him about Patricia's work and everyone else, Louise's work on hidden homicides, and saying that a lot of the forces were reluctant to share their data or didn't have the data at all. And his response was, well, it's just not your data to have. And I think that just sort of says it all. And I think, I don't know how we get here, but surely the answer has to be greater transparency. So transparency in that the police understand that, yes, it is our data to have and that it is shared with us, but also, I guess, within that, if there is greater transparency, you would also see where all the gaps are in the funding and where it isn't, where the resources aren't there. Because to Louise's point about being constructive, then you'll begin to spot all of that. So yeah, I don't know how we get there, but greater transparency.
No, thank you. That's really interesting. Dave, did you want to?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. I mean, to go back to your starting point of the 26 people who'd been kept on in the Met, having had sex offences in their background. There's a sort of complete lack of transparency around the police disciplinary process, and so that's one of the things that really needs to be exposed in these various inquiries. You know, you need to take that relatively small number of cases. It should be a straightforward job to pick over them, establish what the salient facts were, who made the decisions, and whether or not you can obviously maintain anonymity where it's required, but you can at least go into that subset to understand whether, you know, what level of seriousness and whether in all reasonableness you could say that it was okay for some of them to be retained, but others had been retained on the nod. There's just a lack of transparency about that disciplinary process. And again, there's a sort of notorious dodge where police have been able to retire their way out of trouble in order to retain their pensions, you know. So, I don't know, but it's certainly more opaque than a armed forces one. You know, journalists can cover a court-martial hearing, but you can't cover a police disciplinary hearing. And you know, you really only find out fragments of numbers in IPCC annual reports, and there's very little to go on. And the stony path of the FOI requests that might lead you somewhere in several years. So I mean, that would be a thing that if you were writing an op-ed, you would say, here's what we need to do. We need to open up the disciplinary process. We need to understand who made those decisions and why. Yeah. And to Louise's point about funding and budgets, which is important and well taken, transparency should be free, right? Shouldn't cost a thing. Yes. What's your name?
Hey everyone, I'm Hamza. So one suggestion I had, given what everybody's saying, is one interesting route into this story, I think, would be almost an explainer on where currently in the structure accountability lies. Because one thing that I found after the Sarah Everard case was over, that the collective calls for Cressida Dick's resignation, I wanted to judge critically to see whether they were warranted, but I didn't have the tools to do so, perhaps because I didn't read enough, but also because I don't understand really what her role is all about and what she is accountable for and what the Home Secretary is accountable for and what, you know, the individual senior officers in charge are accountable for. So one suggestion for the Tortoisians in the room would be just a hard facts look at where accountability lies right now, what the flaws are in that and what's missing, and perhaps a suggestion as to how we rewire that accountability. Because it seems that, you know, there can be a lot of mudslinging between the different groups that have taken this conversation to try and wriggle out of being held accountable.
Thank you. I feel a Sensemaker special coming on, Phoebe. I've made notes. Yes, and yes, coming to you, and I have a question for you as well, and then we're going to have to move on.
No, I just wanted to say it must be very lonely feeling for police officers who are the good apples to be among the bad apples and to feel this erosion of trust by public as well. So in covering this story, let's remember how to preserve that good element as well, because they should be feeling very lonely as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that again speaks to Louise's point about allowing the good ones to show that. Can I just ask very briefly, you mentioned benchmarking, I think, against examples from other countries. Are there any in particular? You mentioned Denmark.
I think, you know, if you go to Far East, immediately we say their practices are not in line with our, you know, values, and then we have conflicts of, you know, facts and values in our own democracies as such. But Denmark, Sweden, you know, I mean, even the form of their penitentiary systems and their jails are completely different. They don't lock them up. They have, you know, villages, and, you know, they work and they learn a craft.
And transparency as well.
Transparency as well. And back to James' point, I don't think that because we're confederated, we shouldn't have independent annual reports from London police. Why not? I mean, you know, okay, if Devon doesn't want to publish a report, and then to have the best policing force annual, I don't know, benchmarking internally as well, domestically, before going outside. There are a lot of ways. I just think a lot of it goes as well into the mindset of the Home Secretary. And it's a bottom up and top down. You cannot fix it. And it always goes back to budget. I respectfully disagree. It's not only about budget. Right. We blew up 40 billion in Afghanistan, you know, 20 years, 2 billion for policing at home. I think budget is there. It's what we do with it is different.
Yeah, fair point. Yes, Patricia. Who's making another point on screen? Louise, let's come to you. Then, is that what you were raising your hand about, Patricia? Oh, okay. And so then you, and then we're going to have to try and find 5 minutes for each of Facebook and the Tories. So Louise, let's come to you first.
I wanted to say something that speaks to an experience that a friend of mine had in the police. So she left Oxbridge. She's the cleverest and the best people I have ever known. She went into the police. She chose not to go through the fast track scheme because she wanted respect. And she moved up and she became a sergeant. She is the kind of person that you would want to keep in the police. She's the kind of person who would have become a chief constable because her intellect is beyond anything, her communication skills exactly the same. She is sort of, she's the best of the best. And she has told me the most horrendous stories of sexism, and this would have been in the 90s and early 2000s that she experienced. And she left the police, perhaps unsurprisingly. And I just think it's really important to understand how you can shed excellence so quickly when you have people who have to battle, and that therefore that means that when people do choose to speak out, as a society and as the media, we really need to support them, because it's incredibly hard to do that. And it's incredibly hard to stay in such an aggressive and difficult and unfriendly, harsh environment, and to do the right thing and to be able to speak out.
Thank you, Louise.
Hello. I'm kind of interested on how...
What's your name?
My name's Izzy. How Tortoise would sort of talk about how, like, the police's image has been... I know this is kind of what we were talking about anyway, and it kind of links back to what Hamza was saying about how the police's image has changed and, like, what Cressida Dick's sort of, like, influences and what nobody really... Well, in some sense, you do know what she does. In another sense, you're not really told, kind of going back also to, like, police crime commissioners in local areas. Like, for example, my godfather used to work high up in the police, and my family made an effort to try and vote for the police crime commissioners, but none of us would know what they did. So we would ask him every time, be like, which, in your mindset, which is the best person to vote for? I think that's very interesting. And obviously not everybody has that contact in the police, and we should be, looking into what they stand for and what they don't stand for. And also kind of going back to what Louise said, that my sister used to work in data analysis in the police. And whenever there was a bad press story about the police, in their sort of staff newsletters, they'd get sort of a thing about Cressida Dick with some puppies as a sort of like trying to counterbalance all the bad response they've had, which is like terrible. This is not how you should be dealing with an issue which is so like integrated into policing society. And then it also, sorry, I'm sort of thinking loads of different thoughts, but also makes me think about what the police said back in March with Sarah Everard's murder. And they were like, we're going to have undercover police officers in nightclubs. And now contrast to how Wayne Couzens he was in plain clothes, he just stopped her in the street and arrested her with some hairbands and took her into his car. How that contrasts with what they said back in March, like, sort of baffles me that they obviously knew that information and they didn't do anything about it. And I would be really interested to see what Tortoise's opinion is on all of that.
Well, we're still working on it.
Yeah. No,
I'm as bewildered as anyone. Look, this is not a forum for elegant segues, but one can but try. Someone mentioned the mindset, and we're going to come to, very briefly, I do want to come to, we're going to get a brief explanation at the end of the hour on what happened to Facebook yesterday. But the mindset of the Home Secretary, the mindset of the government. Sir, you were in Manchester last night, and we had a quick chat this morning about what it is that this government is doing to the big argument about tax and spend and conservatism. And if I understood you right, you were suggesting they've turned it on its head.
So I will have a quick go at this. I also just want to say I totally agree with you, Izzy, on this, on the just sort of bewildering, half-assed response every step of the way by the police. And weirdly, I found myself getting incredibly wound up by the smallest thing in the last 24 hours, which is if you're going to announce a review into problems of misogyny in the police force, don't just announce a review, have a person and have the terms of the review, have the timetable of the review, know when it's going to report and what the scope of the review is going to be. And I say that as someone who previously worked in an organization that found itself in the middle of a really, really ugly situation. I joined the BBC just after the Savile story broke. And one of the things you knew was that when you came out and you announced you were going to do something, you had to have those supplementary questions answered. And so the thing that really wound me up today or the end of last night was, how was it possible that they put out an op-ed in effect saying we're going to have a review without having worked out who it was and all of those other things? And it feels as though there's an amazing story about LBJ and Earl Warren, which is when they commissioned what became known as the Warren Commission, he said no. And LBJ, in effect, leaked the appointment of Earl Warren to the Washington Post. And that morning he woke up and looked in his paper and discovered he was running the Warren Commission. My point is, when you've got a crisis of this scale, you can get someone within 24 hours. You just say, look, we have a fundamental issue, to Ali's point, we have a fundamental issue about the credibility and the trust in the police. And there are a few things that are as important as that. So I'm with you 100%. That doesn't answer your question at all. Okay, Tories. The reason why something really, really important and I think underreported is happening here is that what happens with political coverage is, as in so much of our journalism, you report what you know and understand that may not be important at the expense of what you don't but is. And the truth is that there are two things that the Conservatives have chosen to do that is redefining economic conservatism. And they're both, neither of them make for good pictures, let's put it that way. Neither of them are an easy culture story, neither of them are an easy Brexit identity story. One is prioritizing tax over borrowing. Rishi Sunak said yesterday that borrowing is immoral. Right? Putting aside the kind of force of that language, what's amazing is just thinking that through. Really? Is it definitely the case that it's better for people to tax them now? And in some cases, that means to impede their chances to spend, impede their chances to invest, impede the ability of the economy to grow new businesses. Is that better because, in effect, you secure the revenue that you then go on to spend in year than borrowing, which, yes, may put a burden on the future, but can be paid for through growth? It's a very, very unconservative point of view, or it's not an obviously conservative point of view. So Rishi Sunak has created a doctrine, tax over debt, right? That itself is not necessarily supported by a good many Conservatives, and he's opened himself up for the first time on that flank. And then the second thing that's happened is that for the first time in my life, we are witnessing the birth of the pro-inflation Tory. We have a prime minister who is arguing for wage increases. Now, he's arguing from a coherent point of view, which is he thinks that we've lived for too long with cheap labor. Incidentally, cheap labor is not going to continue, so he's right to see that coming to an end. But we've lived for too long with cheap labor. And we've tried to use that cheap labor and a service economy to grow our GDP. And so he's making a full-on assault on the UK's productivity problem. These are not the wrong arguments to have, but his answer is a high skills, high wage economy. And that throws up two questions. One is, how do you get there? How do you get an even spread of these high skills? But the second question is, does it become then to use Matt Dancona's phrase, a high skills, high wage, high price economy? Are we going to be in for a period of inflation? And it seems to me as though you've got a new kind of economic conservatism, which is tax now rather than debt, right? And pro-wage increases. And the big impact of that is that the politics that for the last decade, in many ways, was post-financial crisis driven by debt, government debt, looks to me like in the 2020s, like energy costs, fuel shortages, universal credit repeal, and national insurance contribution increases. You put all of those things together, plus inflation, plus then significant increase in interest rates, you've got a cost of living politics that is very, very different to what we've seen. And so while everyone's saying this is quite a vacuous Conservative Party conference and it doesn't have any of the political drama, which it doesn't, it does have a very significant, I think, change of direction in terms of politics towards a central economic argument.
James, can you explain in 3 sentences, and if you can't, please, anyone else do, why it is okay now for this country to borrow infinitely? I do understand, we've kind of begun this argument before, and I do understand why it's okay for the US too, because they're really, really big.
Yes.
But I don't understand why it's okay for us.
So the argument is not whether you can borrow infinitely, right? So we've got debt to 100% of GDP. Right. The question is, if we say, right, let's bang it up to 150% of GDP, you'd say that's crazy, right? There's going to be a run on the pound. This is really dangerous. But if I said to you, if we increased it in principle to 110% of GDP, and as a result of that, you don't need to tax in the way in which you're taxing now, then you might think, oh, that's quite interesting. If we don't tax now, we put more money in people's pockets, we might see greater consumption and greater investment. We might actually see more growth. Okay. And at that point, you don't have 110% of GDP because the growth of the economy is such that it may end up being 104 to 106%. And that is a really significant difference. So you've made a small debt increase, but you've benefited in terms of growth, expansion of wealth and employment. And the reason why the Tories are really in a twist about this is that they think that their Chancellor has been hijacked by the small c conservatism of the Treasury.
Okay, thanks. So that's not the argument that QE has changed everything, that's not modern monetary theory, is that what you've just told me?
By the way, firstly, I'm going to leave you to Facebook. No, I don't think it is. I mean, it is the short version of that answer is no, it's not, right? But the number to keep in your mind is what are interest rates now? Yeah. And if you did have an inflation problem, even a modest one, what would you need to increase interest rates to in order to have some impact on inflation? And it's a tripling, quadrupling, quintupling of what the current interest rates are. Okay, keep that number, whatever it is, in your mind, everybody. Thank you. All right. Very briefly, Facebook went offline. I think Jono. Who's Jono? Is that you? He's on the screen. John, I'm sorry. We do have somebody who can explain what happened, I think. Jono. I need to be looking over there. Hi.
Sorry, my camera quality is absolutely trash. That's just the way it goes. Hi, everyone.
Very appropriate.
Yeah, well, in a way.
Jono, thanks for joining us. I gather you may not know, but you have a theory. What do you think happened to Facebook yesterday? Offline.
I'm really sorry, but this. For those of you, my name is Jono. I'm a senior threat intelligence analyst at PwC. So we do a lot of the malware analysis stuff that you guys may or may not see on the news. I'm really sorry to tell you this story is malware analysis. So we do a lot of ransomware and nation state based attacks. We do a lot of that reverse engineering of the binaries themselves. I know I might be just speaking words, but anyway, the theory, there have been many theories from different news sources, but I'm actually really sorry to tell you this is actually just not that interesting from a relative to what we usually see on these kind of like the New Zealand Stock Exchange attack, which was DDNS via a group based in China. It looks like, so essentially, the internet is made up of devices that talk to each other via what's called DNS, domain name system. Essentially, your device is given an IP address, which is like a load of numbers with dots in the middle. And they communicate via what's called BGP, which is the Broadcast Gateway Protocol. The BGP, to kind of put it in human terms, if your server, which is used to communicate, is, I don't know, a post office, the BGP is the road that is used to get the post from one destination to another. Facebook employs a custom protocol of BGP, so that means they operate basically outside of this typical way that BGP would work. So if their BGP goes down, a lot of their internal systems will also go down. So what happened is it looks like their BGP protocol had an error. We don't actually know what the error is, and I doubt Facebook will ever tell us.
All right, Jono, it's interesting. You started by saying it's not interesting. Ian Campbell is saying it's not interesting. I think it's massively interesting because it hasn't happened before. It was terrific that it happened. The question is, can it happen again?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
so how is this service, whose main selling point is that it doesn't go down, go down, and you say, and you're at PwC, it can go down again?
Yeah, I guess when you think about, if you don't work in tech, you don't work with these systems, you don't realize that, like, actually it's tech. It's sometimes we configure it incorrectly and sometimes it goes down. And yes, with Facebook, it's $165 million worth of stocks lost or whatever, but it's the same as your computer, showing a blue screen or whatever. It's tech. It's not made in the same way humans are. It breaks and we sometimes have to fix it. In this case, it was really bad, and Facebook clearly when they made their servers basically integrate with one another. So when they can't communicate, everything goes wrong. Everything. So the Facebook employee,
whole system was much more fragile than we thought it was.
Yeah, I guess if you're looking for like that kind of snippet. Yeah, sure. It's all super fragile and we're all fucked basically. If that's what you're looking for, then yeah, sure.
You could work in a newsroom. It wouldn't pay as well as PwC.
Yeah, well.
I want to give Luke, my colleague, the final word here, because we cover Facebook and all the other tech giants as tech states. And Luke, if you're there, my question, if it's failing technologically, and I shared a link with you to a piece that caught my eye in the New York Times, is it actually a failing state in other respects as well? Because the thesis there was that they're reaching, let's put aside the fact that it's put together with Elastoplast, that they're reaching for new ways to get more eyeballs, and it's not all working. And behind the scenes, what came across in the movie, in The Social Network, as a slick operation run by, Mensa members, is actually a big flailing corporation that is losing its competitive edge. Is that fair?
That's a decent reading of it, possibly. One of the things that is quite clear is that this outage doesn't really have anything to do with Facebook's long-term infrastructure as states in the world, whether it's a tech state or not, and whether it's valid to sort of keep thinking of it as a company that we could treat like a country. But I know we've not got much time. There are a few areas in which you could look at that sort of thing and begin to ask the question whether it's more of a failed state. And the ones that we should certainly go after are the decline of usage of Facebook in its key markets. The most recent figures from 2020 of their daily usage data was the first that showed they had less activity in the US and Canada than they'd had in the previous year. So it's the first net decline in usage of Facebook. Their heartland is now increasingly developing countries, those with massive growing populations, but the usage of Facebook in those countries is important to look at as well. Are they monetizable markets? And traditionally, US and Canada is the most monetizable market for Facebook's lifeblood, which is ad revenue. So that's the first thing. Another would be the decline in reputation that they've suffered as a result of the Facebook files that were obviously still very hot when this outage happened. And there's nothing to suggest that there's any connection at all, but it did bring Facebook onto headlines in a different way than they were the previous day when the whistleblowing had been going on. And it'll be interesting to see finally how it affects a third thing that we should monitor, which is a decline in their value. The share price of Facebook wavered, it dipped, it's recovering now. This is something we've seen with scandals that have affected their reputation in the past. There's been dips and recovery. So whether we'll see a sustained stock price effect of the Facebook files is an open question, and we will keep an eye on that. A final thing might be to say that Facebook, different from some of the other tech states that we follow, they've never had an innovation win. They've never had a technology win. They've been doing the same thing for the entire time. And they've scaled it very successfully to a huge number of markets and a huge number of people. But Oculus VR, which is their virtual reality headset, it's not a market winner. Their metaverse technologies, their wearables, their glasses, their camera, none of it has been industry leading in the same way that Apple, for example, has delivered industry winning, industry leading tech. So yeah, Tech States comes out tomorrow morning, and we are talking a lot about the sustainability of the companies and everything. So look out for that. But that would be my read on Facebook becoming a failed state. Doesn't really have anything to do at all with the outage.
Okay, but it's happening nonetheless. So that's cool. Thank you. We are over time. Chris Chadwick in the chat points out or argues that Apple's actions against Facebook have caused most of its decline. Are you raising a hand, sir? Yeah. Okay.
The best thing, the best thing that's happening in this newsroom this week is sitting right there. If you get the chance, you have to listen to Giles Whittell's slow newscast on From Russia with Diamonds. It's only taken him 20 years to get there, but it is one of the longest.
It is at least slow, right?
Yeah. but please listen to it. Please listen to it. It's a piece of storytelling that you won't forget.
Thanks all very much.